The stories. The motel room safe with a secret ledger. The motel sat just off a two-lane highway that curved through a stretch of desert where radio stations faded to static. The sign still buzzed faintly, a few letters missing so that it read, asterisk, Elton Mo L asterisk. For years, the rooms had been rented mostly to truckers, traveling salesmen, and people who didn't want their names on a record. But in the spring of 2011, a part-time maintenance worker named Vince Daly age 42, came across something in room 12 that would change how the place was remembered. Vince wasn't an ambitious man. He fixed air conditioners, mowed the patchy grass, and replaced broken keys. On that particular morning, he was there to remove a faulty safe from under the dresser. It had been locked for years. Ever since the manager before last passed away, the new owner told him to cut it open so the space could finally be rented again. Inside was a single object, a small black ledger, its edges curled and faintly sticky, as if something had spilled on it long ago. The front cover had no name, no label, just a thumbprint stain. Vince assumed it was nothing. Maybe a guest had used it to keep receipts. He tossed it in his tool bag and went on with his work. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of him. He opened the ledger while sitting at the counter of a diner across the road. The first few pages were normal lists of initials, dates, dollar amounts, but halfway through, the tone shifted. Names were written in full, alongside words like balance cleared and returned. Some lines had stars next to them, and others were crossed out entirely. Near the back, he saw a series of entries dated between 1984 and 1987, all under a heading written in shaky block letters, Collections Room 12. At first, Vince thought it might have been a motel expense log, but a few of the names seemed familiar. One matched a woman whose picture still hung behind the front desk, a former housekeeper who disappeared decades ago. He mentioned it the next day to Marlene Greer, the daytime manager, who shrugged and said old records were full of ghost entries. Still, something in her expression told him she wasn't entirely surprised. Over the next few days, Vince couldn't let it go. He went to the county library and looked through microfilm archives of local newspapers. In late August of 1986, he found a short article about a missing motel employee named Carla Mendez. The story said she'd last been seen leaving work after a night shift, carrying the deposit bag for the week's earnings. Police assumed robbery, but no suspect was ever found. That name Carla was written 3 times in the ledger, each next to the same date. August 22, 1986. One entry read, final balance, then ledger closed. The coincidence was too clean to ignore. Vince took photocopies of the pages and showed them to a retired sheriff's deputy he knew, Alton McCrae, who had worked the area back then. Alton took one look and went quiet. After a moment, he said the handwriting reminded him of Ray Weller, the motel owner in the 80s. Weller had died in 1992 after his car went off a canyon road. No foul play suspected, just bad brakes and too much whiskey. Alton said there were rumors Weller used the motel as a front for short-term loans cash advances to locals who couldn't go through a bank. The ledger might have been his way of keeping track of who owed what. The crossed-out names, he explained, could mean debts paid. Or something worse. Vince started noticing how people reacted when he mentioned the find. Some locals would change the subject. Others told him not to dig. The place had been losing business for years, and nobody wanted reporters sniffing around. But he couldn't shake the thought that someone might still care about what happened to Carla Mendez. He tracked down her sister, Isabel who still lived 2 towns over. When he showed her the ledger, she didn't even touch it. She just said, "We already tried for 25 years. Nobody cared then. They won't now." Before leaving, she pointed at one of the other names, P. Larkin. He was a regular there, she said. Used to drink with the owner. Ask the bartender from that time if he's still alive. Vince found Pete Larkin listed in a 2020 phone directory. He was living in a nursing facility about 30 miles away. When Vince called, the man's memory was fading, but one thing stuck. There was cash, Larkin said. Every weekend, people paid what they owed. Weller called it the 12 Club. Said if you didn't pay up, you checked out for good. It sounded like drunken talk, but when Vince returned to the ledger, he realized that almost all entries labeled cleared were tied to weekends. One page listed the amount 500 next to C. Mendez, and a note, handled in 12. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. Carla disappeared on August 22nd, 1986. Weller's ledger mentioned her by name that same day. Weller died 6 years later in what might have been an accident, and now, decades later, his motel still stood, barely operating, with a safe no one had opened until Vince cut it loose. He reported everything to the local sheriff's office. They took the ledger as evidence, but nothing came of it for months. Then, in early October of 2012, a construction crew working on a new drainage ditch behind the property uncovered partial human remains. Dental records confirmed they belonged to Carla Mendez. The investigation was reopened. Forensic teams matched residue from the ledger's pages to soil found at the burial site. Both contained the same rare industrial solvent used in the motel's janitorial supplies during the 80s. It wasn't enough to convict anyone, but it closed a circle. The 12 Club wasn't a rumor. It was bookkeeping for threats carried out. By the time the motel finally shut down, Vince had long quit. He moved north, took a job maintaining cabins at a lakeside resort, and stopped talking about what he'd found. Reporters wrote short pieces calling it the Ledger case, and then it faded again into local legend. Years later, when the building was demolished, one last item turned up in the rubble, a second, safe, smaller, newer, but sealed tight. Inside, they found only a key-tagged room 12. Copy. Nothing else, no pages, no ledgers, just that key. Placed deliberately. People who'd worked there guessed Vince had planted it, a quiet nod to what he'd uncovered, but those who knew him said he wouldn't have done that. He hated attention, maybe it was Weller's doing, a strange joke meant to outlast him. Either way, the motel sign was gone, the ground was leveled, and the highway kept humming like nothing had ever happened. Still, sometimes at night, when the wind passes through the empty lot, locals say you can hear the faint rattle of a loose metal door like an old safe settling back into silence. Whether that's true or not hardly matters. What stayed was the story, and the proof that even the most ordinary places can keep ledgers of their own. The stories. Night guard, who followed footprints beyond the bridge. The first prints showed on a cold night when the river smoked and the closed bridge let out a slow iron groan. Frost held the gravel in a crust, so every step someone took across the municipal yard snapped like thin glass. Merrick Holland worked nights because he liked quiet places and because the warehouse paid overtime when storms rolled in. He was 41 by the last week of January, and he kept his thermos on the dash while he did his rounds. His plan was simple that night. Check the north fence. Check the generator shed. Sign the log before dawn and head home on the empty road. He saw the prints on his second pass, and their path made little sense when he stood still to study them. The footprints curved toward the pedestrian bridge that crossed the narrow river, which had been closed since late autumn while crews waited on parts. A chain-link panel barred the entrance with a sign that warned about unsafe decking, and Marek knew the sign by heart. He radioed the dispatcher with a routine note, since procedure made repeaters of careful guards. He kept his words easy. He said there were footprints where there should be none, and that he would check closer. The reply was scratchy and bored, and Marek almost laughed at the familiar tone. The treads were small and tidy, like work boots with a diamond pattern, and each step pressed the frost to a dark oval. The prints went right up to the chain-link panel, then slipped under at a low spot where someone had pulled wire loose. Marek knelt and touched the ground, and cold shot through his glove while he reset the bent ties. He peered down the dark shape of the bridge and decided he would not walk out there in the cold wind, not without telling someone first. He called again, then kept his flashlight tight to the decking while he stepped forward, and he felt the bridge vibrate under his boots. He moved slow because he always moved slow when he could choose between slow and fast. Halfway across, the prince turned to powder as the frost thinned, and he had to scan both sides for scuffs on the gray boards. He found a faint line where grit had dragged, like something heavy had been pulled by rope. On the far side, the deck ended at a set of concrete steps that dropped to the river path, and here the prince deepened again. They pointed left, past an old pipe cradle and a low stand of scrub willow. Reports in the fall had mentioned fishers along the bank after hours, which was normal, and a few had been moved along without trouble. A clerk at the gas station had told an officer that a man bought batteries and duct tape in the same visit, which was normal enough, though people sometimes remember strange details when asked at night. Dispatch logs showed power dips near the intake station from time to time, and maintenance had chalked that up to loose connections in cold weather. Marek followed the prince along the river path until they vanished near a patch of bare gravel that the sun struck most days, even in winter. He stood there and listened. Somewhere upstream, an owl made 3 soft calls, and a semi rolled past on the highway with a roar that shook the willow branches. He decided he had gone far enough for one night. He photographed the prince on his phone and headed back, and he wrote a careful note in the log before dawn. By the next shift, the frost lifted late, and the yard lights burned a clean white circle on the gravel. Marek checked the generator shed first and noticed something he could not shake. The small lock on the diesel cap was scuffed, and a scratch ran from the cap to the lip like a hose had rubbed while someone steadied a weight. He checked the fuel slip from the last delivery and did the quick math. The level looked low by a few gallons, which could happen, and which also could not. He spoke with Celia Karp in maintenance the following afternoon because Celia knew more about the place than anyone in the office. Celia was 58 and had worked 3 floods and 2 droughts, and she kept a pocket notebook with every code for every panel. She said the power dips had been shrugged off by city, and that nobody had time to pull the panels until spring. She said the bridge closure made her nervous because blocked paths invite shortcuts. On the 3rd night, Marek went to the bridge before his first pass, and he crouched at the chain link panel with a small bag of sidewalk chalk from the supply closet. He rubbed a pinch of red chalk into the dirt under the gap and dusted the decking where the prince had scuffed before. He wanted a way to tell if someone crossed again, and he wanted to see where the dust went when the night did its work. He made his rounds slower than usual and kept his eyes on corners where things hide without trying. The radio remained quiet until midnight. Then a call came in about a coyote by the south gate. Marek drove down and found only wind, and he thought the call felt like a joke he had heard before. He logged it anyway, because logs are the bones of quiet jobs. When he returned to the bridge, his light caught the faintest red sunset on the boards, and he felt alert in the way he liked. The chalk had smeared in a thin line toward the far steps, and the dust trailed down to the river path. On the gravel, small red flecks marked an arc that led behind a stack of old culvert pipe where few people bothered to look. He moved closer and found a cooler wedged inside a culvert mouth, and an inverter buzzed inside like a tired hornet. A length of clear hose lay coiled by the cooler, and the nozzle had a strip of duct tape where a leak had been patched. The setup looked temporary and careful, like someone trusted routine more than luck. Marek called dispatch, and his voice stayed even while he chose words that would not set hairs on necks. An officer drove down the service road and met him by the culvert, and they stood and listened together. The officer did not rush, which Marek respected, and the 2 men watched the bridge until the wind shifted. The officer said he would put a note on the morning brief, and he asked Marek to keep eyes open without playing hero. The phrase made Marek smile, and later he did not tell that part to anyone. In the days after, Marek traced the quiet pattern that repeats when someone abuses access. He checked camera angles and discovered the north yard camera had been bumped on a date that matched a power dip, and the new angle showed the sky more than the gate. He opened the back of the housing and found 3 screws missing, which was always a tell. He measured the footprints with a scrap of tape and got the same length each time, which told him the walker was careful with steps or else was one person always. He walked to the diner 2 blocks away during the afternoon and chatted with the cook named Huxley, who knew every vehicle that rolled through after midnight. Huxley said a man in a dark jacket sat late 2 nights a week, always with a single cup of coffee and a pocket radio on the booth seat. Huxley said the man tipped exact change and left when the freight trains crossed the river, which happened near the time Marion Street patrol cars swapped shifts. At the yard, a temporary guard from an agency had been filling 2 nights that Mark traded away for overtime on weekends. The temp signed the log with 2 letters and a quick crooked line. The initials were H and P, which matched about 1,000 people and which could match none. Merrick did not care for suspicion as a hobby, yet he did not care for coincidences when fuel levels fell in quiet inches. He sat in his sedan before shift and went through old notes in his glove box where he kept manuals and photocopies. A contractor named Deacon Varelli had lost access in 2017 after a billing fight, and his crew had worked the intake station on that very river path for years. Merrick wrote the name on a small card, then tossed the card at once, because names can lead you down the wrong hall. He kept his attention on the temp schedule instead, and he compared logs against the chalk nights and the reported coyote calls. On a dry Tuesday, red chalk showed again on the gravel, and the cooler in the culvert had moved 2 feet, which looked like a nervous person trying to outsmart the obvious. Marek called the non-emergency number and asked for a quiet presence, and officers waited with their lights low behind the old salt shed. Marek did his rounds with wide loops and checked his watch without seeming to check, and he waited on the near side of the bridge by the chain link panel. A figure came over the crest like a shadow that had business, and the boots set down in precise little ovals. The man wore a dark jacket with reflective piping like the agency issued, and he carried a duffel that sagged from weight. Merrick stepped forward and kept his light on the ground, and he spoke steady without trying to sound like an actor. He said the bridge was closed by order of city, and he asked if help was needed. The man froze and looked left toward the culvert, which told Marek the only thing he really needed to know. The officers stepped from behind the shed, and everything stayed dull and true from there. The duffel held a 12-volt pump, a power bank, and 2 hoses cut to different lengths. The cooler held the inverter and spare tape and a stack of empty hand warmers, which can keep batteries alive just long enough between dips. The generator diesel cap carried the same tape residue as the hose, which tied the loop neatly enough for any careful mind. In the report that later circulated, details sat plain without flourish, which is how such documents talk to the world. The temp guard was named Harley Pruitt, age 36, and he had worked a roster of small night jobs that rewarded boredom more than skill. Archived calls showed he had reported animal movement at the south gate on the nights when the pump likely ran, which kept eyes away from the river path. Store security footage from across the highway reportedly showed a man matching his build, buying duct tape and batteries on a schedule that matched power dips at the intake station. Celia came down with a wrench the following morning and replaced the generator cap, and she tightened every panel on every camera while humming through her teeth. She shook Merrick's hand with hard gratitude, and she told him the thing she always tells the new ones. Quiet places are never empty, and attention is the difference between a close call and a cleanup. People in town talked for a day, and then they talked about weather and games and a boat stuck on the ramp. Merrick logged his shift and ran a cloth across the dusty dash, and he looked once at the bridge where the chain link panel still hung crooked. He felt a small weight lift, which felt almost like pride, and then he felt something more like relief. He went back to the prints in his head, and he ran the path out again from the first night to the last. The steps had led beyond the bridge in the way tracks tell their whole story, and the red chalk had given him a quiet mouth. He thought about the way a small problem can hide inside a larger closure, and how a closed bridge invites someone to think rules are only suggestion. He drove the empty road home before dawn, and the river threw thin fog across the low bend like quiet breath. Merrick did not decide to keep working nights forever, and he did not make any grand vow. He thought instead about the small habits that keep a place honest, and the way a single set of prints can reveal a patient plan. In a town that prefers routine, a careful person with time can pull things apart slowly, unless another careful person keeps watch and asks simple questions that carry weight. By spring, the bridge opened again with new planks that smelled like fresh cut pine, and families leaned on the rail to watch geese slide by. Some people remember a rumor when they cross, while most only hear water and light traffic and the chatter of kids. Merrick crosses when his route calls for it, and he never looks for drama, though he notices scuffs out of habit and checks if gates sit straight. He keeps chalk in the glove box still, and he keeps a small card that reminds him that attention wins more often than luck. The card does not carry a name, and it does not need one, because the lesson was simple and dull and true. He followed footprints beyond a bridge that everyone ignored, and he found a tidy machine made for taking small pieces of a place that trusted silence. Quiet work gave him back a little faith, which is worth more on a night shift than any badge or speech. When people ask him why he noticed, Marek says it was the shape of the morning frost and the numbers that never add fare. He tells them he just kept walking where the prince asked him to go, and he wrote things down when they mattered. He says a bridge is still a path even when closed, and that someone will use that fact to their advantage at least once. The rest of the time, he does not say much, and he lets the town hold its small stories without fuss, because most of them end with someone paying attention and returning what does not belong to them. The stories. This night guard filed a missing hours report. The file started as something routine, a timestamp discrepancy in a small town security log. A night guard at a regional warehouse filed a missing hours report, claiming his time card didn't match the hours he'd actually worked. The report was short, oddly calm, and dated early March of 2019. No one thought much of it until he never came back to work. His name was Leon Hartridge, 43, a former truck driver who'd switched to night security after a back injury. The warehouse sat off a rural interstate, the kind of place that smells like cold concrete and diesel even after midnight. Leon's shift started at 10 and ended at 6. His wife told investigators he usually came home by 6:30, drank coffee, watched old westerns, then slept until afternoon. That pattern broke on a Wednesday night when he didn't clock out. The initial assumption was simple. Maybe he quit. Maybe he got another job, or maybe he just walked away. But the following morning, his supervisor found his lunchbox, still sealed, and a half-empty thermos on the break room counter. His reflective vest hung neatly on a hook, radio still attached. The last digital swipe of his ID was logged at 3:42 a.m., then nothing. The company filed a basic absence form, but by Friday, the sheriff's office got involved. They reviewed the overnight CCTV, 6 cameras in total. 5 worked fine. The 6th, covering the north loading dock, froze at exactly 3:41 a.m. Then, 3 minutes later, all motion detection stopped. It wasn't just a blackout. The file header showed it had been manually overwritten. Leon's brother, a retired electrician, offered to check his apartment when calls went unanswered. Inside, he found Leon's keys on the counter, wallet in the same place he always left it, and a spiral notebook on the kitchen table. The last entry, written in his blocky handwriting, read, "Clock shows 4 when I walk out. Feels later. Light's wrong color again." Investigators traced that note back to similar remarks he'd made to coworkers in the weeks before. One of them, a forklift operator named Ray Corbin, told deputies Leon had been bothered by something about the new lighting system. The company had replaced the overhead fluorescents with motion-activated LEDs that flickered under certain camera angles. He said it messed with his sense of time, Ray recalled. He'd come in thinking it was midnight and swear it was almost morning. At first, police treated the notebook as irrelevant, a tired man rambling about lights. Then came the dispatch logs. A 3:48 a.m. call had been placed from Leon's company-issued phone to a non-emergency county line. The recording still exists. He told the operator he needed to document something about the schedule. His tone was formal, detached, like he was making a statement rather than asking for help. The operator tried to clarify what he meant, but the line dropped mid-sentence. The call lasted 53 seconds. When they checked the network records, they found something else. The call didn't route through the cell tower nearest the warehouse. It bounced from a tower 30 miles east across the river. That's the same direction Leon's phone was last pinged before it went offline, near an unfinished section of the old state bypass, closed since 2011. Deputies drove out there and found fresh tire tracks in the gravel, leading toward a fenced construction lot. No vehicle was recovered. Weeks passed. Local news ran a single story: warehouse guard missing after time card dispute. Public interest faded quickly. And as fashion, local news wanted the power. But in June, the company's new HR contractor discovered something odd while auditing payroll. Leon's time card for that final night didn't just show missing hours, it showed duplicated entries. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., his ID was logged twice at two different doors, seconds apart. One swipe at the front entrance, one in the mechanical hallway. Same ID, same timestamp. Technically impossible. Investigators re-examined the internal server that housed the door logs. That's when they noticed a secondary access profile had been created using Leon's credentials, but tagged with a different department code, one belonging to the electrical maintenance division. The account was active for 1 week, then deleted. IT records listed the administrator as temporary systems testing. No one at the warehouse remembered authorizing it. The more they dug, the stranger the timeline became. Archived footage from prior nights showed brief blips in the digital clock, displays 3-second shifts where the time rolled backward before correcting itself. Leon had written about this in another note. Clock skipped again. Same moment the hum cut out. Technicians later confirmed that during those same minutes, a backup generator was cycling power for a series of sub-level fans. Only a few workers even knew the sublevels existed. They weren't active parts of the facility anymore. When authorities finally inspected the lower level, they found old offices sealed off with plastic sheeting and warning signs for asbestos. In one corner sat an unplugged time clock terminal dated 1994. The paper spool inside it still contained partial punch cards, yellowed and brittle. One of them bore Leon's employee number, printed faintly beside the name of a former contractor who died years earlier. That discovery reframed everything. Somehow, the modern ID system had merged data with the obsolete one, producing overlapping records that made it appear Leon was in two places at once. The missing hours report he'd filed wasn't about unpaid wages, it was about time itself, slipping in a way he couldn't explain. The investigators never found conclusive proof of tampering, though one retired systems tech told local reporters that the company's old mainframe still ran partial code from a discontinued scheduling program called ShiftLine. He claimed that under rare conditions, like a power cycle during data backup, it could duplicate entries with original punch data from the archive, labeling them with active credentials. If that happened when Leon's ID was scanned, it might have triggered a fatal error, but that's still theory. What's factual is this. The same Friday, the audit uncovered the duplicate entries. A highway cleanup crew reported finding a fragment of a reflective safety vest along the bypass construction route. It matched the brand issued to Leon's team. DNA analysis was inconclusive exposure, and time had degraded it, but one detail stood out. The vest's zipper pull contained traces of oil consistent with the warehouse's loading dock equipment. In the end, the case file closed under missing person, presumed deceased. Officially, no foul play. Unofficially, everyone agreed something in that building broke his sense of time before he vanished. His wife still keeps the notebook on a shelf. The last page, just beneath his final note, has a short line written in different ink, maybe added later, maybe the same night. It reads, "Clock shows 4, door says 3. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. A man noticed an inconsistency, tried to document it, and disappeared between two readings of the same minute. Whether that was error, accident, or something stranger about how those systems looped, no one can say for certain. The warehouse eventually upgraded its entire security network, scrapping every trace of the old servers. But the missing hours report still sits in the county archive, a single-page statement with the timestamp frozen at 3:42 a.m. The same moment the camera went dark. The stories. Paramedic who kept one final snapshot. The story began with a photo that shouldn't have existed. A single Polaroid, slightly overexposed, showing the inside of an ambulance during a call that supposedly never happened. It was discovered years later, tucked between the pages of an old medical manual in a small-town fire station's archive. The man behind that photo was Martin Kessler, a 42-year-old paramedic who'd spent nearly 2 decades working in a quiet coastal county. He was the kind of person people trusted instantly: steady hands, calm voice, always first on scene and last to leave. Colleagues said he never forgot a face, even from calls years earlier. That photographic memory made the irony of what happened next impossible to ignore. In late March of 2012, Martin and his partner, Dana Ruiz, responded to a dispatch from a stretch of highway north of town. A rollover accident, single vehicle, one driver, reportedly conscious but trapped. The log shows they arrived at 2:17 a.m. Weather clear, visibility decent. Everything about the report was ordinary. Until it wasn't. When firefighters reached the car, there was no one inside. Seatbelt unbuckled, airbags deployed, engine still ticking from heat, no footprints in the gravel shoulder, no sign of struggle. Dana's field notes mention Martin standing there longer than anyone, staring into the dark beyond the guardrail, as if waiting for something to move. He didn't say much on the drive back. Just, it doesn't feel right. Someone was here. The next morning, Martin called the dispatcher, asking for the driver's name. There wasn't one. The system had registered the call as civilian report unknown source. No, 911 record existed, only a radio relay from a patrol unit that later denied making it. That was when Martin started keeping a notebook, part medical log, part journal. He filled it with incident details that didn't make sense, addresses that didn't appear on maps, names that changed between shift reports, an emergency call from a decommissioned nursing home that had burned down 5 years earlier. Dana joked it was his ghost file, but Martin treated it like evidence. In mid-April, station archives show him requesting a portable camera from inventory, the kind still used for accident documentation. He said he wanted backups for reports. No one questioned it. That camera became the source of the one photo that remains. On May 5th, Martin responded alone to a cardiac distress call in a residential neighborhood. The official dispatch recorded a woman named Eleanor Marsh, age 71. When Dana arrived 15 minutes later, the house was empty. No patient, no signs of struggle, only Martin sitting on the front steps, shaking. He told her he'd just finished chest compressions, but there was no body. That evening, he turned in a sealed envelope to the station chief. Inside, a single Polaroid showing an elderly woman on a stretcher inside the ambulance. Her face pale but peaceful, IV line in her arm, heart monitor reading a steady rhythm. The timestamp on the photo matched the call, yet no hospital in the region logged a patient by that name, and the ambulance's GPS data placed it in the station lot at the time. For weeks, the department treated it as a data glitch, a wrong timestamp, maybe a mistaken upload. Martin, however, stopped taking calls entirely. He used his accumulated leave and disappeared from the rotation. Dana later said he'd started visiting the county records office, spending hours looking through missing persons reports from the 1990s onward. According to the clerk's statement, he requested files on one case repeatedly: a local woman, 71 years old, who'd vanished from her home in May of 1996. Her name, Eleanor Marsh. She'd been last seen the same week a younger Martin had begun his EMT training in that same county. What tied them together came from an old photograph Martin found in the file. It showed a group of EMT trainees standing beside a vintage ambulance. On the far left, a younger Martin smiling awkwardly. On the far right, a woman in a white nurse's uniform, Eleanor, back when she'd volunteered with the training program. Her sudden disappearance had never been solved. The case quietly closed after 3 years. The evidence stacking grew stranger. In late May, an internal audit found Martin had accessed archived radio frequencies from the old dispatch system equipment retired in 1999. He'd been trying to trace the source of that first mysterious accident call. Logs showed someone or something still transmitting on that outdated frequency once every few nights, always repeating the same brief phrase, "medic en route." By early June, Martin returned to work briefly, though he looked exhausted, his once steady hands trembling. He told Dana he thought the woman from the Polaroid had been trying to reach him for years, that all the phantom calls were echoes of old emergencies, looping through time until someone finally answered. She begged him to take time off again, but he refused. "If I stop listening," he said, "they'll stop trying to come home." The last confirmed sighting of Martin Kessler was on June 15th of that year. Surveillance footage from a rural gas station shows him fueling the ambulance alone, headlights off, before driving north toward the old highway. The timestamp reads 2:17 a.m., the exact minute of the original rollover call. 3 days later, the ambulance was found parked beside a defunct rest stop, keys still in the ignition. The driver's side door was open, the radio turned to static. In the back compartment, responders discovered a single Polaroid camera lying on the gurney. It contained one undeveloped sheet of film. That image was later processed by the state lab. It showed the inside of the ambulance, empty except for a stretcher, with 2 folded paramedic jackets placed neatly side by side. The back doors stood open, facing a foggy stretch of road. The official report labeled Martin Kessler missing, presumed deceased. No further transmissions were logged from the old frequency. The firehouse quietly retired his call sign, and the Polaroid was sealed in evidence storage, tagged simply, "Recovered from Unit 7, June 15, 2012. Years later, when new recruits asked about him, veterans would point to the framed photo on the wall, the one of Martin and Dana receiving their service award in 2010. Behind the glass, barely visible under the reflection of overhead lights, there's a faint double exposure. The outline of an ambulance interior, doors open, a stretcher waiting. At this point, the facts that remained were simple. The snapshot was real, the patient never existed, and somewhere along that forgotten highway, a paramedic might have finally answered a call meant only for him. The stories. This dispatcher flagged a warning nobody else heard. In the summer of 2015, a small county dispatch center in the Midwest logged what should have been another quiet night routine calls, minor accidents, nothing serious. But at 2:36 a.m., dispatcher Lorna Keats flagged a single line in the call log with a red warning tag. The rest of the shift didn't notice. 12 hours later, a missing person report came in from the same road. Lorna was 52, a mother of 3, and one of the few veteran dispatchers still working nights. She'd spent more than 20 years listening to the county breathe through static. Drunk drivers, runaway teens, distant gunshots that usually turned out to be fireworks. That night, she was scheduled to train a new hire, Evan Rhodes, a quiet 20-something fresh out of community college. He remembered her as calm, methodical someone who double-checked even the quiet calls. The call in question lasted just 19 seconds. It came from an unregistered prepaid cell phone traced to the stretch of County Route 47 between mile markers 19 and 20. The caller didn't say much, just a breathy male voice repeating, "He's still here," before the line cut. Background noise? Steady hum, maybe an engine, maybe wind? Lorna replayed the audio 3 times, then filed it under possible domestic disturbance. But something made her stop the recording and reopen it. According to her later statement, she heard a faint ticking sound under the voice mechanical, uneven. "Like a turn signal that never clicked off," she said. At 2:38, she added a note, "Warning possible vehicle hazard, County 47. No one responded. The patrol car assigned to that region had already been rerouted to a stranded motorist 15 miles away. The shift ended at 6, and by the next day, the flag was buried beneath dozens of other overnight notes. 2 days later, a farmer found a truck half submerged in a drainage ditch along the same stretch of road. Inside was 30-year-old Bradley Norham, a construction worker from a nearby town. Engine still idling, phone missing, seatbelt unlatched. Coroner placed the time of death around 2:40 that same morning, within minutes of Lorna's flagged call. County investigators wrote it up as a single-vehicle accident. They said Bradley likely swerved to avoid a deer, hit the embankment, and drowned before he could escape. Lorna, however, couldn't let it go. She'd handled too many wrecks to ignore the timing. The ticking sound, the phrase, "he's still here," the untraceable number, it didn't add up. A week later, she retrieved the audio from archive storage and took it home on a thumb drive. Her husband found her replaying it that evening, headphones pressed tight, not speaking for almost an hour. She said she thought she heard two different voices, one layered under the main one. A whisper, or maybe a radio echo, she told him. He dismissed it as interference, but Lorna wasn't satisfied. She called the phone company listed in the report, Westridge Cellular, to ask about prepaid tower logs. The representative told her the call had pinged off a repeater near Old Mill Road, 2 miles east of the crash. Problem was, that tower had been offline for maintenance between midnight and 3 a.m. She double-checked through county records. The outage was confirmed. If that was true, the call shouldn't have connected at all. When she brought this to her supervisor, he told her it wasn't her concern. The system hiccups sometimes, he said. Let it go. Instead, she filed a quiet memo through the internal server detailing her findings and sent a copy to a friend in the State Highway Patrol. The friend, Officer Miriam Cole, kept the note, but admitted later she didn't think much of it until months afterward. Then, in November of that year, a storm knocked out power across the same district. During the outage, technicians discovered a repeater box still running from an auxiliary generator, a model decommissioned years earlier. Inside it was a burned SIM card fused into the port. Serial number partially visible. It matched the first digits of the untraceable phone from Lorna's warning. This detail never made the official report. A small internal inquiry followed, but concluded there was no functional link between the repeater malfunction and any known incident. By that point, Lorna had already transferred to a day shift. She told coworkers she didn't want to hear the night anymore. Years later, a regional journalist researching abandoned communication systems stumbled on the archived memo. The journalist, Alan Marin, interviewed Lorna at her kitchen table in 2020. By then, she'd retired and moved to a smaller town near the river. In the recording, which he later shared for a local podcast, she said something quietly that caught his attention. You know what gets me? He said. He's still here. Not, I'm still here. Someone else was supposed to hear it. Alan followed the breadcrumb trail dispatch logs, weather reports, the crash file, and that malfunctioning repeater. He found that the generator inside had been serviced twice after its supposed decommission date, each time by a subcontractor called Northspan Utilities. Northspan had folded in 2013, 2 years before the incident. Whoever maintained that repeater after the shutdown wasn't listed in county records. Alan managed to contact one former Northspan technician, a man named Dennis Harlow. Dennis said that in the early 2000s, some repeaters were used to piggyback maintenance frequencies for nearby rail lines. It was a cheap way to test emergency signals, he said. But it was never supposed to overlap with civilian channels. If it did, you'd get bleed-through, like ghost calls. Ghost calls. That term caught traction online when Alan's podcast aired, though Lorna hated it. She said the word ghost turned it into superstition, not signal bleed, not malfunction. Still, she admitted the possibility haunted her. The crash site, the voice, the timestamp, they lined up too neatly. In 2021, the county repaved Route 47, covering the drainage ditch. The wreckage was long removed, but for maintenance training, new dispatchers were still shown the red-flagged log from that night as a case study in procedural diligence. The warning nobody else heard became a quiet legend among the staff, half cautionary tale, half proof of how easily small details slip away. What remained were fragments: the 19-second clip archived under a generic file name, the memo Lorna wrote, the service invoices from Northspan, and the coroner's note listing water in the lungs. Each on its own could mean nothing. Together, they formed a pattern too odd to ignore but too thin to prove. Lorna passed away in 2023. At her retirement gathering the year before, a few old colleagues brought up the story. She just smiled and said, "It was probably static." Then, according to Evan, her trainee from that night, she added quietly, "But static comes from somewhere." At this point, the facts that remained were simple. One call, one warning, one man dead on a dark county road. The system logged everything perfectly, except for the truth behind that 19-second window. Whether it was interference, a misrouted test frequency, or something else, no one could ever show exactly who made that call or why it stopped where it did. Still, in the dispatch training manual filed a few years later, there's a footnote beside Lorna's case study. It reads, "Always listen twice before you clear a line." No capital letters, no bold text, just quiet advice embedded between procedural codes. A reminder that sometimes the sound we dismiss as noise might be the only signal that matters. The stories. Paramedic who kept the final snapshot from triage. The last photo on Kira Voss's work phone was never supposed to survive the software pilot. It stayed anyway after the server hiccup. Kira was 34, a city paramedic who liked quiet late calls and neat paperwork. She started that Tuesday on basic supply checks and light banter. Her goal sounded simple in her head. Finish a 10-hour shift without a single upgrade, then get home before midnight for leftover curry. The call that changed the night came from a roadside motel behind a car wash. Dispatch logged an unresponsive male, unknown age, possible overdose. She and her partner, Mateo Lark, rolled in with lights low and voices steady. Room 12 smelled like cleaner and stale heat from the wall unit. A thin man lay sideways between the bed and a chair, breathing shallow and quick. No wallet in sight. A cracked phone blinking a silent screen. Kira saw a visitor sticker stuck to his hoodie pocket. The date line was smudged, but the background color looked like a clinic pass. They bagged him for a minute to settle his breathing. A half-full paper cup sat by the sink, ice melted into a flat circle of water. Vital signs were jumpy, but not crashing. He opened his eyes once and said a short word that sounded like Riley. Then he slipped under again. They moved fast to the medical center near the river. The radio reported a separate pileup north, which meant triage would be crowded and loud. The hospital had been piloting an electronic intake tool all month. It asked for a quick face photo to match a barcode before the wristband print. The intake line was 3 deep when they arrived. A nurse pushed the cart forward, the printer chattered, everyone talked clipped and fast on instinct. Kira snapped the photo at the kiosk because the app flashed a warning. Upload pending, network unstable. She kept his hoodie on because he shook. The man landed in a monitored bay by the doors. A resident named Bryn Ketter called for labs and a gentle drip. The resident squinted at the chart. Kira wrote her run sheet near the sink. She noted the visitor sticker and the motel room number, and she logged the time from the wall clock. Security cut a small plastic bag from the man's waist string. The bag held a folded laundromat card, a bent key, $3, and a receipt. A second surge of ambulances flooded triage with crash patients. Yellow tags and green tags pressed into the hallway. Voices layered into a dense cloud. In the noise, someone swapped beds to clear space. The man with the hoodie slid one bay over, and a crash patient took his place under a portable lamp. Kira and Mateo finished their handoff after an hour. The man seemed stable. They cleaned the stretcher rails, signed the tablet, and walked toward the exit. The code alarm sounded from the bay they had left. Kira swiveled in the doorway and saw movement through bodies. Someone called for epinephrine with a clipped tone. She stood still without getting in the way. The team pushed and counted and charted. The monitor flattened once, then kicked back, then flatlined again while staff switched roles. Kira did not like leaving after a loss. She did what protocol allows. She tapped Mateo's arm, then they cleared the doorway and stepped into the humid night. Back at the station, reports stacked up behind them. An hour later, an internal message flagged her run. The patient from the motel did not make it. The summary blamed an unknown allergy aggravated by a blood pressure medication. It suggested the crew had no information at scene and that intake documentation was incomplete. Kira read that line twice. She remembered scratching on his left palm, faint letters smudged by sweat and cleaner. She also remembered the sticker on the hoodie pocket. She opened her notes app and zoomed on a quick photo of the motel nightstand. A corner of the visitor sticker showed a logo like a lighthouse beacon. Her phone buzzed again with a request from quality assurance. Please confirm the scene contained no allergy indications. Please confirm no wallet or tags were found. Kira typed careful answers. She wrote that the scene had no formal bracelet, but there was writing on skin and a clinic sticker with a dateline. She could hear Mateo in the next room telling a joke about stale granola bars. She closed her eyes, pictured the kiosk light, and remembered the app freeze. She opened the work app and saw the pending icon. The photo from triage had sat in the queue since that busy hour. It should have deleted itself. She saved a copy to the secure folder because the pilots sometimes ate evidence. Officers who handle accident scenes had warned crews to keep their own digital trail. In the photo, the man stared past the kiosk, eyes unfocused, mouth clenched. The shot was crisp enough to read small print on the edge of his hoodie. She leaned toward the phone and read the visitor sticker again. The shape matched a clinic 2 miles north. The color matched last week's series on their site. She noticed something else that bothered her. The wristband in the photo was already on his right wrist, and the printed name was not Riley or unknown. The name read Colin Hart with a birth year that was wrong by 2 decades. The band also carried a room assignment for a different wing upstairs. Kira checked the run sheet and confirmed the time on the photo. It was taken before he left intake, with a clock in the frame above the desk. She balanced possibilities in her head. Either the band printer reused a label by accident, or triage grabbed a band intended for someone from the crash. She called the station supervisor and spoke in a flat voice. She also saved the app log and the photo metadata. She wanted a clean chain if asked. The supervisor told her to hold steady. He said quality would reach out by morning and that she should write her memory within the next hour. Kira wrote about the motel room, the visitor sticker, the palm writing, and the switch between bays during the crash surge. She avoided guesses and listed times. By sunrise, the hospital asked to speak with her. A comm coordinator named Lauren Pike scheduled a meeting in a small office near the loading dock. Lauren listened without interruption while Kira laid out the sequence. He wrote down the kiosk freeze, the wrong name on the band, and the sticker details. "Do you have the photo?" he asked plainly. Kira nodded once and slid her phone forward. Loren studied the image like a puzzle that did not want solving. He asked for permission to copy the file into their incident folder. Kira agreed and asked for a printed receipt of transfer. Lauren printed one with a timestamp. Later that day, security pulled camera clips around intake and the hallway. Audio is thin in those clips, but timestamps line up with dispatch logs from that hour. A volunteer recalled bumping the band cart while pushing crash supplies. The cart carried 2 stacks from different printers. A stack fell and another stack landed on top. A nurse remembered seeing a resident hand off a half-printed band to clear paper jams. Everyone meant well, and the hallway demanded corners get rounded to save seconds. The wrong band landed on the wrong wrist during the shuffle. The allergy field below the name read none, and the medication plan followed that value at speed. The palm writing found in the photo said lisinopril with a shaky loop on the L. That writing matched a pharmacy warning card found later in the discarded bag. The path to his name was still unsolved. The wrong band had masked his identity, and the motel room registry carried a fake first name paid in cash. Kira and Mateo stopped by the motel between calls and spoke to the clerk. The clerk remembered the man because he had asked for late checkout and offered a 10. The clerk described a quiet talker with a careful way of folding receipts. He said the man asked if the clinic across the highway took walk-ins on Sundays. Kira asked if he had left anything behind. The clerk pulled a small envelope from under the counter and handed it over. Inside was a second laundromat card. The card carried the same punched pattern as the one from his bag. A faded stamp showed a cartoon lighthouse that matched the clinic logo from the sticker. Kira wrote the clinic name into her notes and searched internal contacts for a social worker who knew someone there. Network rules can sometimes solve what computers cannot. By evening, a social worker faxed a staff list with a first name that matched the word Riley from the ambulance. A receptionist there recalled a cousin who visited often. The cousin lived near the rail tracks and had shared rides with a man named Rail Hinton. That name pulled a match from the clinic immunization folder with a phone number. The number reached a sister on the 3rd ring. She had been calling hospitals all day without luck. She cried once, then steadied, and asked for straight answers. Kira gave the sister the number for Loren and the case coordinator. She explained that the hospital would confirm identity through records, and that she would share what she could. The sister described Rael as a careful man who wrote allergy reminders on his hand while saving for new glasses. She said he kept every receipt because he lost a wallet once. She also said he used visitor stickers as bookmarks. He picked them from clinic bowls like candy because ink on paper made him feel less small. The hospital identified him formally by evening using clinic records and a dental chart from an old file. The visitor sticker linked the timeline to a specific morning. The report shifted. Instead of blaming a vague, unknown allergy, the document focused on a band cart process and a printer override protocol during surge conditions. Quality assurance asked to keep Kira's photo, which showed the wrong band before bedside orders fired. Her pending upload had turned into an anchor for the timeline. Loren thanked her in a quiet hallway near the vending machines. He said the photo mattered because it caught a small truth at the exact right second. He also said the hospital planned a training session with a new rule. Wristbands would be applied only after a complete scan and a spoken name confirmation. Kira asked about the visitor sticker and the laundromat card. Lauren said the family had seen those items and that they were grateful for the detail and care. There was a final meeting about the phrase kept photo, because the tool policy warned against storing faces. Lauren documented the server failure and the pending icon. He wrote that the photo had been preserved to support timely reporting during a pilot outage. He signed the form with a date and left a copy in her file. Mateo teased her gently about her habit of triple-saving things. He said she was a walking archive with a neat ponytail and an allergic reaction to loose ends. She laughed, then stood quiet for a breath. She thought about the palm writing and how small a warning can look when a hallway feels crowded. Weeks later, a new kiosk arrived with better network checks. The printer trays carried bold labels, and volunteers learned to stop and verify whenever carts bumped. Kira kept a printed run sheet from that night in her desk. The sheet had her small notes about the lighthouse sticker and the ice in the cup. An instructor asked her to teach one class for new hires. She told them about the photo and the band, and the way tiny signals can vanish under noise. A student asked how she remembered so much. She said she wrote on index cards, and she made little recordings after calls while the radio was still warm. The sister sent a letter with a simple line. "Thank you for noticing the sticker." It made the phone call shorter, and it made the goodbye kinder. Kira folded the letter into the run sheet and closed the drawer. She washed her coffee cup, then walked outside to breathe the late shift air. The city sounded like a distant fan that needed oil. She wondered how many small warnings slide past each night because nobody has a free hand to catch them. She knew the photo would fade into policy and training slides. She also knew that a single clear frame can hold a hallway steady when clocks feel slippery. On quiet nights, she drives past the motel on her way home. The neon still flickers, and the car wash still hums across the frozen curb. She thinks about the visitor sticker and the lighthouse logo. She thinks about the wrong name on a band and the right name in a folder miles away. She is not someone who keeps trophies from hard calls. She kept that one photo long enough to send it to the right folder with a receipt. The fact that it stayed during a glitch felt like the kind of accident that refuses to be ignored. It asked for someone to slow down. Her work is not a string of heroic saves. It is a long practice of noticing small, true things before they slip beneath a wave of noise. The photo taught her something she already knew. Details are not decorations, and time is never a blur when someone chooses to write things down. The story ends without fireworks because that is how most true stories end. A hallway returns to normal, and a system gets a little less clumsy. Kira drives home with the window cracked and a song on low volume. She knows nothing can make the loss tidy, but clarity still matters. She unlocks her door, drops her bag, and checks her phone for one last message. The queue is empty, and the app finally reads, "Upload complete." She smiles once without any triumph, then she turns off the light and lets the day settle while the city hums and the clock keeps moving. The stories. Why this librarian reopened a cold map drawer. In late September of 2014, the Quiet Town Library off Route 47 got a new head librarian named Corinne Ashland. She was 39, a former archivist who'd spent years cataloging geological surveys for a state university. By all accounts, Corinne wasn't the kind of person to chase ghosts until the day she decided to reopen an old, locked map drawer that everyone else had forgotten. The drawer sat in the basement stacks, labeled Time State Topography 1952 to 1958 asterisk. Its brass handle had gone dull with age, and the key was missing. For years, staff used the cabinet as a makeshift table for coffee mugs and boxes of donations. But one morning, while rearranging a shipment of donated atlases, Corinne noticed a faint rust-colored smear near the label. It looked like dried clay or maybe iron dust. Either way, it didn't belong there. She mentioned it to her assistant, and he laughed, saying, "That drawer's cursed. Ask Mrs. Langley. She swears a surveyor disappeared working on those maps." Corinne smiled politely, but something in her stayed hooked on the idea. She asked around. The drawer dated back to when the building served as a records annex for the county planning office. In the mid-50s, several regional floodplain studies were stored there before the files were relocated or supposedly relocated to the state archives. No one ever verified that. When Corinne checked the archive's digital inventory, she found gaps. 4 missing surveys, all from the same year, 1957. They covered a stretch of riverland that was later condemned for a hydroelectric project that never materialized. That evening, Corinne used a universal key set kept for restoration work and opened the map drawer for the first time in decades. Inside were rolled parchments bound with cotton strings, their edges yellowed. Beneath them, she found a tin box wrapped in wax paper. Inside the box lay a water-stained notebook, a compass with a cracked lens, and a faded photograph of 2 men standing beside a field the size of a football stadium, ringed by survey poles. On the back of the photo, someone had written, asterisk, last day before the dig, GM asterisk. Corinne scanned the initials against old employment rosters. There was a Gregory Mallon, a field engineer who'd gone missing in June of 1958. Officially, he'd left the project for family reasons, but the local paper from that summer told a stranger story. Asterisk, surveyor vanishes near proposed reservoir site. Search suspended after 3 days. Asterisk, no follow-up, no body recovered. Corinne started a file. 1. She called the county records department. A man named Leland Cross, an aging clerk who'd worked there since the 70s, remembered something. Mahlon. Yeah? He was working on the Franklin Bend plan. Whole thing got shelved when the funding dried up. I heard his partner quit soon after. Leland didn't recall the partner's name, but he mentioned an old storage trailer the county once kept near the riverbank. They hauled the trailer out after a flood in the 60s, he said. If anything survived, it's in the historical depot now. The depot was just a few miles away. Corinne drove there that weekend, signed in as a researcher, and requested the Franklin Bend materials. The clerk brought her a warped cardboard box smelling of mildew. Inside were soil samples, invoices, and a reel of magnetic tape marked Audio Log 4 field notes. She had to borrow an old player from the depot staff. The recording was faint, but clear enough to recognize 2 male voices. Asterisk, Greg, you're not logging this, right? Asterisk. Asterisk. Relax. It's just us. But if this ridge keeps sinking, we need to report it. Asterisk. Relax. Relax. Asterisk. Asterisk. We will. After the last survey, the company can't afford another delay. Asterisk. The tape ended with wind noise and a scrape, like a microphone hitting dirt. Corinne replayed it 3 times, listening for landmarks. At one point, one of them mentioned mile marker 12 and the culvert by the sycamores. Using digitized topographic maps, she traced those features to a narrow bend along the river, now fenced off as private land. When she brought this to the local sheriff's office, the deputy shrugged. If you're talking about Mahlon, that case is older than my dad. We can't go digging around on private property for a rumor. But Corinne wasn't chasing rumor. She was following evidence. She emailed a geologist friend from her university days, Dr. Theo Ricks, who specialized in landslide patterns. Theo ran a ground-penetrating radar survey along that same bend under a research permit for soil erosion. The data showed a deep subsidence pocket about 20 feet from the current riverline, consistent with an old collapsed tunnel. Theo sent her the printout and a note, asterisk, "You might have just found their camp trench." Asterisk. They returned together a week later. Theo handled the radar equipment while Corinne recorded the coordinates. Near sunset, a small piece of metal surfaced from the silt, a corroded survey tripod leg, stamped Property of Franklin Bend Hydro Limited. The find was modest, but it confirmed the crew had worked exactly where she predicted. From that point, Corinne began piecing the timeline. The notebook from the tin box mentioned sudden soil shifts, pressure readings, and the phrase asterisk, map variance, river shift, not natural. Asterisk. The handwriting was Malon's, matching samples from his earlier reports. It appeared he suspected someone had deliberately diverted a drainage channel to falsify flood risk data, possibly to inflate land value before government acquisition. If true, exposing it could have derailed the whole project. The company had millions at stake. Mahlan filed his last note 2 days before he vanished. Corinne cross-checked the company records and found the corporation dissolved in 1961, right after a quiet lawsuit settlement with an undisclosed party. No public record linked it to Mahlan. But tucked inside the notebook's back cover, hidden beneath the lining, she found a short letter addressed to M.R. Hanley, attorney at law. It never got mailed. The ink was blurred but readable enough. Asterisk, they moved the stakes. If anything happens, check the revised map in drawer C. It's the only truth left. Asterisk. Drawer C was the one she'd opened. By early winter, local journalists picked up her findings. The county authorized a limited excavation, mainly to verify the historic maps. When workers dug near the subsidence pocket, they uncovered remnants of an old metal barrel containing drafting tools and fragments of canvas. Among them was a wristwatch, glass shattered, still faintly engraved, asterisk GM, asterisk dental fragments. Nearby later confirmed Mahlan's identity. The discovery didn't just solve a missing person case, it revealed a quiet cover-up. The original floodplain data, preserved in those maps, showed the river was unstable long before developers planned the reservoir. Ignoring it had likely saved the investors short-term losses, but cost one man his life. The county issued a formal acknowledgement of error, though no one alive faced charges. The land was later rezoned as a conservation area. Corinne kept working at the library, though people now came from all over asking about the librarian who solved the map mystery. She never took credit beyond saying she just followed what was left behind. The old drawer was cleaned, cataloged, and displayed behind glass with the tin box and the compass inside. Every so often, she'd unlock the case to polish the brass handle, and she'd think about Mahlan's note, the way he wrote times the only truth left, asterisk. She understood now that archives aren't just about paper or ink, they're about the things people try to bury, and the few who still choose to look. By the next spring, the library basement smelled of fresh paint. The drawer sat quietly in its corner, again, cool metal against the hum of fluorescent lights. And that was enough. No headlines, no dramatics, just a reminder that sometimes reopening the past isn't about curiosity. It's about letting someone finally be found.